What if your deepest prayer, for something truly out of this world, was suddenly answered? Imagine whispering a plea into the universe, not for wealth or fame, but for contact with something else. This is the story of how Sam Hega's profound, lifelong wish for alien contact wasn't just a fantasy, but became a startling reality. For years, Sam kept a secret, a profound experience that redefined his understanding of faith, reality, and the universe itself. What if prayer doesn't work the way we've been taught? What if the universe listens differently than we imagine? Prepare to journey into an account that will challenge everything you thought you knew about prayer, faith, and humanity's place in the vastness beyond. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened to Sam Hega in the mountains of Colorado will make you question whether you've been praying to the right place all along. Crimson. Now, let's go back to the night Sam's prayer was answered. The cabin sat at 9,200 feet, tucked into a grove of aspens that turned the mountainside gold every autumn. Sam Hega had bought it 3 years ago with money from a settlement nobody talked about anymore. A car accident that wasn't his fault. A wife who didn't survive it. A daughter, Emily, 7 years old, who walked away without a scratch but stopped speaking for 6 months afterward. The cabin was supposed to be healing. Immigration. A place to start over. A place where the silence of the mountains might somehow be less oppressive than the silence of their house in Denver, where Sarah's absence filled every room like smoke you couldn't see but couldn't stop breathing. It was October, and the aspens were doing their thing, turning the slopes into something that looked like hope if you squinted hard enough. Sam didn't squint anymore. He just looked at things as they were. Gold leaves that would fall, snow that would come. A daughter who smiled now, but still had nightmares about twisted metal and her mother's voice calling her name. Emily was asleep upstairs. Shimmer stood on the deck, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, staring up at a sky so clear and dark and full of stars, it felt like standing at the bottom of an ocean made of light. He'd always loved the stars. Even as a kid growing up in Durango, he'd don't have a dollar amount. Some damage can't be repaired. Some things, once broken, stay broken. He'd stopped going to church after the funeral. Not out of anger exactly, just out of exhaustion. The platitudes had worn him down. She's in a better place. God needed another angel. Everything happens for a reason. None of it helped. None of it explained why a woman who volunteered at the food bank and read to kids at the library and made Emily laugh until she couldn't breathe had to die at 34 because some kid was texting while driving. So, Sam stopped praying to God. But he didn't stop praying. He just changed who he was praying to. It started as a joke almost, a bitter, half-serious thought one night when he was standing exactly where he was standing now, looking up at the stars, feeling the weight of Sarah's absence like a physical thing pressing on his chest. Impartial. If there's anyone out there, if there's anything beyond this, show me, because I can't believe in a God who lets this happen. But maybe there's something else. Maybe we're not alone. Maybe someone out there understands what this feels like. Imminently had said it out loud, his voice swallowed by the mountain silence. And nothing happened. No lights in the sky. No cosmic revelation. Confirmation. Just cold air and distant stars and the sound of wind moving through the aspens. But he kept doing it, night after night. Amos, not every night, but often enough that it became a ritual. A prayer to whoever might be listening. Not for Sarah to come back, he wasn't delusional. Not for the pain to stop, he knew it wouldn't. Ignition. For contact. Kosher. For proof that there was something beyond the mundane cruelty of random accidents and texting teenagers and wives who died for no reason. Silence that the universe was bigger and stranger and more meaningful than insurance adjustments and therapy sessions and a daughter who still woke up screaming. Tonight, October 17th, the air was sharp enough to sting his lungs. The stars were impossibly bright, the Milky Way a river of light cutting across the sky. Sam set the cold coffee on the deck railing and looked up. "I don't point on this specific mountain." His heart began to hammer against his ribs. Every rational part of his brain was screaming that this was a drone, a helicopter, a military aircraft, something explainable. But the light moved wrong, too smooth, too silent, too deliberate. It stopped about 200 feet above the clearing behind the cabin, hovering there, pulsing gently, casting pale blue light across the aspens. Sam's hands gripped the deck railing so hard his knuckles went white. "No," he whispered. "No, this isn't real." But the light was real. The way it illuminated the trees was real. The way his shadow stretched long and dark across the deck was real. And then a voice spoke, not out loud, inside his head. Clear, calm, utterly impossible. "Sam Hega, you called. We answered." Sam's legs gave out. He collapsed against the railing, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps, his mind fracturing, trying to process what was happening. "Who are you?" he managed to choke out. "Mientras, we are what you've been searching for. We are the answer to the prayer you've been speaking into the void. And we are here because you are ready." "Ready for what?" "To understand. To see. To know that your species is not alone, has never been alone, and that the universe is far more complex and compassionate than you've been taught to believe." Missions. The light began to descend further, settling into the clearing with no sound, no disturbance, just a gentle presence that seemed to make the air itself feel different. Thicker. Limed. Alive. Sam pushed himself upright, his entire body shaking. He should go inside. Missa the doors. He should wake Emily and call someone and do anything except stand here watching an impossible light settle into his backyard. But he didn't move. Crimson because beneath the terror, beneath the rational mind's desperate attempts to explain this away, there was something else. Recognition. As if some part of him had been waiting for this moment his entire life. The light began to change, to solidify, and from within it, a figure emerged. Tall, perhaps 7 feet, head slightly, a gesture that seemed almost curious. You prayed for contact, for proof that you are not alone, for evidence that there is more to existence than the suffering you have endured. I am that proof, and I have much to tell you, if you are willing to listen. Sam found his voice, though it came out as a hoarse whisper. "Why me?" "Because you were ready. Because your heart was open. Because your prayer was genuine. Not born of curiosity, but of genuine need. The universe responds to need, Sam. Not always in the ways you expect, but it always responds." The being moved closer, and Sam saw that it was holding something. A small device, smooth and featureless, that pulsed with the same blue light. "May I come closer? I want to show you something. Something that will help you understand why I am here and what your prayer has set in motion." Every survival instinct Sam possessed was screaming at him to run, but he didn't. He couldn't. Presumption. Because this was what he'd been asking for. This was the answer to 3 years of prayers whispered into the mountain night. Prominence. And now that it was here, now that the impossible was standing on his deck, he had to see it through. "Crimson," Sam said. "Show me." The being stepped onto the deck, and Sam noticed it made no sound, as if its feet didn't quite make full contact with the wood. Inflation, it raised the device, and the air between them shimmered. Imientos began to form. Not on a screen, imientos in the air itself. 3-dimensional, vivid, more real than any hologram Sam had ever seen. Windshield, and what he saw made his breath stop completely. Imprisonment. It's ever prayed for some listening, drop a comment. because what this being showed Sam will change how you think about prayer forever. Ojis hung in the air like windows into another reality. Sam saw Earth from space, but not the way he'd seen it in photographs. Them was different. Bargaining. Unless was a web. Imprisoned of light, impossibly thin, connecting every point on the planet's surface. Billions of threads, creating a network so complex and beautiful, it made Sam's eyes water just trying to follow the patterns. The Rocky Mountains. Nelm, his cabin. This is you, Sam Hega. 3 years ago, you began sending out a signal. A prayer unlike most prayers we observe. You were not asking for intervention in your personal circumstances. You were asking for contact, for proof, for connection with something beyond your species. Sam watched as his own light pulsed, night after night, a steady rhythm of longing sent out into the web. Imamized. You've been watching me for 3 years? Combating of you for 3 years, the being corrected gently. Watching implies surveillance. This is different. Your prayer created a frequency, and we are attuned to certain frequencies. When a human prays with genuine openness, with real willingness to receive an answer that might challenge everything they believe, it creates a unique signature, and we respond to those signatures. Why? Janj was quiet for a moment, and Sam had the sense it was choosing its words carefully. Because your species is at a critical juncture. You are young, spiritually young, and you are facing challenges that will determine whether you survive the next century or destroy yourselves. And the outcome depends on how many of you wake up, how many of you remember that you are not alone, not separate, not the center of the universe, but part of something infinitely larger. The image shifted, and Sam saw scenes from human history. Wars, destruction, environmental collapse, but also moments of profound beauty. Williams of kindness, scientific breakthroughs, art that captured something transcendent. Your species has incredible potential, the being continued, but you are also incredibly dangerous. To yourselves, to your planet, to the delicate balance of consciousness in this sector of the galaxy. And so we watch. We wait. And when individuals like you send out a signal, when they pray for contact with genuine openness, we respond. How many others? Sam asked. How many people have you contacted? Thousands, over the course of your recorded history, but the contacts are increasing. More humans are waking up, asking questions, reaching beyond the limitations of their cultural programming. The field is shifting, Sam. Your collective consciousness is evolving, and that evolution is accelerating. The being lowered the conscious like a human is conscious, with thoughts and preferences and emotions, but conscious in the sense that it is aware, responsive, intelligent. It is a field of infinite potential that responds to the consciousness within it. And you, every human, every living thing, you are not separate from that field. You are expressions of it. Sam moved to the deck chair and sat down heavily, his legs unable to hold him anymore. I don't understand. Rematch, with contact, the being said, moving closer but maintaining a respectful distance. And your prayer was answered, not because a god in the sky decided you were worthy, but because your consciousness, vibrating at a frequency of genuine openness and need, created a resonance in the field, and that resonance attracted a response. Me. My presence here is not divine intervention. It is universal law. Consciousness attracts consciousness. Frequency attracts frequency. Like calls to like. Imientos the being sat down on the deck, folding its long limbs in a way that looked uncomfortable but apparently wasn't. It was such a human gesture that Sam almost laughed. Let me tell you about prayer, Sam. Real prayer. Not the kind you were taught in church, where you beg an external deity to change your circumstances, but the kind that actually works, that actually creates change in physical reality. Imprison. Men's mind racing, but his attention completely focused. Prayer is not communication with something outside yourself. It is alignment with the field of consciousness that you are already part of. When you pray with genuine emotion, with clear intention, with the feeling of already having what you desire, you change your frequency. And when your frequency changes, the field responds. Reality reorganizes itself to match your new frequency. That sounds like manifestation, Sam said, like the law of attraction. Those are human attempts to describe universal principles, the being acknowledged, often distorted, often misunderstood, but pointing toward truth. Yes, consciousness creates reality, not through magical thinking, but through frequency alignment. When you vibrate at the frequency of what you desire, you draw it to you. Not because the universe is granting wishes, but because you are literally reorganizing the quantum field through your conscious powerlessness. The words hit Sam like a physical blow. So it was my fault? Sarah died and I couldn't bring her back because I was praying wrong? No, the being said firmly, and for the first time Sam heard something like compassion in its voice. Sarah's death was not your fault, and no prayer could have prevented it. Physical reality has momentum, has laws, has consequences. A vehicle moving at high speed creates impact. The human body has limitations. These are not punishments. They are simply the nature of physical existence. Then what's the point of prayer if it can't change anything? Immigration, being said, but not by reversing what has already happened, by changing how you relate to what has happened, by shifting your frequency from victim to creator, by helping you remember that you are not powerless, not separate, not at the mercy of random cruelty. You are consciousness itself, temporarily experiencing physical form, and consciousness can choose how it responds to any circumstance. Sam felt tears starting, hot and unexpected. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to be okay with her being gone. You do not have to be okay with it, the being said gently. Grief is natural. Loss is real. Pain is part of the human experience. But suffering, the kind of suffering that consumes you, that makes you feel separate from life itself, that is optional. That is what happens when you forget who you are. And who am I? The being stood, moving to the railing, looking up at the stars. Immigration. Sam Hega, insurance adjuster, widower, father. Those are roles you are playing, experiences you are having. But you, the awareness that is experiencing those things, you are something far greater. You are consciousness itself, eternal and infinite, temporarily focused through the lens of a human life. Shima joined the being at the railing, looking up at the same stars he'd been staring at for 3 years. Shimmer, if that's true, if I'm eternal consciousness, then where is Sarah? Is she still somewhere? Consciousness does not die, Sam. Only bodies die. The awareness that you knew as Sarah, the essence of who she was, that did not end. It transitioned. It returned to him that his prayers had been heard all along. Just not by who he thought, not by a god in the sky, but by the universe itself, by the field of consciousness that connected everything, by the same awareness that he was, that Sarah was, that everything was. Why didn't someone tell me this before? Sam asked, his voice breaking. Why did I have to suffer for 3 years thinking I was alone? You were not ready before, the being said simply. Grief has its own timeline. Awakening has its own process. You had to break completely before you could be rebuilt. You had to lose faith in the old God before you could discover the truth of what consciousness is. And now you are ready. Now you can hear this. Now you can receive it. Immigration wiped his face with the back of his hand. What am I supposed to do with this? What am I supposed to do with knowing that aliens are real, that consciousness is eternal, that prayer works but not the way I thought? The being turned to face him, and Sam saw something in those alien eyes that looked almost like a smile. You are supposed to live differently. You are supposed to remember who you are. You are supposed to raise your daughter with the knowledge that her mother's love did not end, that consciousness transcends death, that she is part of something infinitely larger than her small human life. And you are supposed to share this, when the time is right, with others who are ready to hear it. I'm not a teacher. I'm not a spiritual leader. You are a human who has suffered, who has questioned, who has prayed for truth and received it. That makes you exactly the kind of teacher the world needs right now. Not someone with all the answers, but someone willing to share what they have learned. Sam looked at this being, this visitor from another world who had answered a prayer he'd almost stopped believing in. Will I see you again? When you need to. When you are ready for the next level of understanding. But I am always accessible, Sam. Not as a separate being you can call upon, but as a frequency you can tune into. When you meditate, when you pray, when you simply sit in silence and feel for the presence that connects all things, you will feel me there. Not as me among the stars. Negligible. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. Feeling there, women who regionally miss Washingtism when he was also not listened to the stars. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, feeling the stars. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck, to get to the world of something well. And then he stood there, feeling the stars. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck, feeling the stars. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, alone on the deck, feeling the stars about the world. And then he stood there, alone on the deck. And then he stood there, when everyone on the deck, feeling less alone than he'd felt in 3 years, because his prayer had been answered. Not the way he expected, but in exactly the way he needed. Subscribe if this is resonating with you, because what Sam discovered in the days that followed will show you exactly how to pray in a way that actually works. Sam didn't sleep that night. He sat on the deck until the sky began to lighten in the east, turning the mountains from black silhouettes to purple ridges to the gold and green landscape he'd been staring at for 3 years without really seeing. His mind was a storm. Marginalized had convinced he'd hallucinated the entire encounter. Stress-induced psychosis. Crimson he'd been heading toward since Sarah died. But another part of him, a deeper part, knew it had been real. Ignition had been real. The things it had said were real. Imprisonment had slipped tonight had shifted inside him. He heard movement upstairs around 7. Imprisonments, footsteps, light and quick, moving from her bedroom to the bathroom. Imprisonment, said, his body stiff from sitting in the cold for hours, and went inside to make breakfast. By the time Emily came downstairs, he had pancakes on the griddle and bacon in the pan, filling the cabin with smells that felt almost aggressively normal after the night he'd just had. Emily was 9 now, tall for her age, with Sarah's dark hair and his gray eyes. She'd started talking again about a year after the accident, but she was different now. Imprisoned her, more watchful, like she was seeing things other people couldn't see. "Migration, Dad," she said, climbing onto a stool at the kitchen counter. "Morning, sweetheart. Sleep okay?" Emily tilted her head. "Study," Sam said. And Emily smiled, a real smile that reminded him so much of Sarah it hurt. They ate breakfast together, and Sam found himself watching his daughter with new eyes, seeing the way she paused sometimes, as if listening to something he couldn't hear. The way she looked at empty spaces as if they weren't quite empty. The way she seemed completely comfortable with ideas that most adults would dismiss as impossible. After breakfast, Emily went outside to explore the woods behind the cabin, something she did most mornings, and Sam sat down at his laptop. He opened a blank document and stared at it. The being had said he was supposed to share this. But how? Who would believe him? He'd sound insane. Man claims alien visited him after he prayed for contact. That was a headline for a tabloid, not a credible account. But the being had also said that others were waking up, that thousands of people had been contacted, that the field was shifting. Maybe there were others out there who'd had similar experiences. Maybe he wasn't alone in this. Sam opened a browser and typed, "Alien contact after prayer." The results were a mix of conspiracy websites, religious forums, and New Age blogs. He clicked through several, reading accounts that ranged from obviously fabricated to disturbingly similar to his own experience. One account, posted on a forum dedicated to extraterrestrial contact, caught his attention. A woman in Oregon describes a being that appeared after she'd been praying for guidance following her son's death. The description matched what Sam had seen. The same elongated proportions, misuse, very large dark eyes. The same sense of gentle presence despite the alien appearance. And the message was similar too. Commissioners is eternal. Death is a transition, not ending. Palestinians works through frequency, not divine intervention. Sam felt chills run down his spine. Flooring. Dismay. This was happening to other people. Manslaughter the next several hours reading accounts, watching videos, following threads that led him deeper into a community of people who'd had contact experiences. Crimson, not all of them were credible. Imprisonment, some were clearly disturbed individuals, projecting their own issues onto imagined encounters. But others had the ring of truth, the kind of specific him anyway. Serp had answered his prayer, had shared truths that were now burning inside him, demanding to be expressed. He looked out the window and saw Emily sitting on a fallen log at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still, her face tilted up toward the sky. And he realized she was praying, not with words, just sitting in silence, connected to something he was only beginning to understand. His daughter was already doing what the being had described. Iams, already living from that place of knowing. Already comfortable with the idea that consciousness transcends physical form. Semantics, maybe she was the teacher, and he was the student. That night, after Emily was asleep, Sam went back out to the deck. The sky was clear again, the stars brilliant. He didn't pray the way he used to. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat in silence, feeling for the presence the being had described. The field of consciousness that connected everything. And after a while, he felt it. Not as a voice, not as a vision, shimmer, as a presence, a sense of being held by something vast and loving. And in that presence, he felt Sarah. Not as a separate being he could talk to. Mismatch. A frequency, a vibration, a love that had never ended. Tears streamed down his face, but they weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding what the being had been trying to tell him. Consciousness doesn't die. Love doesn't end. Separation is an illusion, and prayer, real prayer, isn't begging an external God to change your circumstances. It's aligning your frequency with the truth of what you are. Eternal, infinite, connected to everything. Sam sat there until the cold drove him inside, and when he finally went to bed, he slept deeply for the first time in 3 years. No nightmares, mails, no waking at 3 a.m. with his heart racing, just deep, peaceful sleep. And in his dreams he saw Sarah, not as a memory, but as a presence, smiling at him, telling him without words that she was proud of him, that he was finally understanding, that he was finally waking up. Immigration, if you've ever... He was pure consciousness, pure awareness. Do not try to use words, the being communicated. Think your questions. I will perceive them. Sam focused his intention. Why me? Why was I chosen for this? You were not chosen, Sam. You chose yourself. By praying for contact, by opening yourself to possibilities beyond your cultural programming, by being willing to question everything you were taught. That willingness is rare. That openness is what we respond to. Muzzle, do you want from me? Nothing. We do not want. We do not need. We simply respond to frequencies that call to us. But there is something you can do, if you choose. Something that will help your species navigate the transition you are currently in. What transition? Presumption. The space around Sam shifted, and he saw Earth again, but from a perspective that was both spatial and temporal. He saw the planet's history unfolding like a film on fast forward. Civilizations rising and falling. Tegavation advancing. The population is exploding, and underneath it all, a frequency. The mientos, the collective consciousness of humanity, vibrating at different levels throughout history. Sometimes higher, during periods of art and philosophy and spiritual awakening, Firefox, during periods of war and oppression and fear, imprisonment. And now, in the present moment, the frequency was fluctuating wildly. Pabianship prospects as the collective consciousness rising rapidly, hamstrings sinking into deeper fear and separation. Patriarch is at a bifurcation point, the being explained. A moment where the timeline splits. One path leads to awakening, to unity consciousness, to a future where humanity joins the larger galactic community. The other path leads to collapse, to destruction, to a future where your species does not survive the next century. Sam felt fear rising. Myth, which path will we take? Shimmer, is not determined. The timeline is fluid. It depends on how many humans wake up, how many remember who they are, how many choose love over fear, unity over separation, truth over comfortable lies, and that is where you come in. I'm just one person. How can I possibly affect the outcome? You are not just one person, Sam. You are already affecting the field. But if you choose to be conscious about it, if you choose to share what you have learned, the effect is amplified. How do I share it? Who will believe me? You do not need everyone to believe you. You only need to reach the ones who are ready, and they will find you. Or you will find them. The universe orchestrates these meetings. Trust that. Sam felt the dream beginning to fade, felt himself being pulled back toward physical reality. Wait, I have more questions. You will have answers when you need them. For now, remember this. You are not alone. You have never been alone. And the prayer you spoke 3 years ago set in motion a chain of events that will ripple far beyond your individual life. Trust the process. Trust yourself. Trust the universe. Sam woke up gasping, his heart pounding, the dream still vivid in his mind. Him grabbed his phone from the nightstand. 4:44 a.m. Shimmer been seeing that number everywhere lately. Emanating on clocks, on receipts, on license plates. He'd looked it up once, found some New Age interpretation about angel numbers and spiritual awakening. He'd dismissed it as confirmation bias. But now he wondered. Smith. Maybe the universe was speaking in ways he was only beginning to recognize. Championship. He got out of bed and went to his laptop, opening the document he'd started 3 weeks ago. And he began to write. Shimmer what to say, just letting the words flow. My name is Sam Hega. 3 years ago, my wife died in a car accident. I stopped believing in God, but I didn't stop praying. I just changed who I was praying to. I prayed for contact with extraterrestrial life. I prayed for proof that we're not alone. And 3 weeks ago, my prayer was answered. He wrote for 2 hours, pouring out everything. The encounter, the being's message, the truth about consciousness and prayer and death, the vision of humanity at a crossroads. When he finished, he had 12 pages. He read through it, expecting it to sound insane. But it didn't. It sounded true. It sounded like something people needed to hear. He saved the document and morning light. Airlines. I can't see her. That's okay. You feel her though, right? And Sam realized he did. There was a presence in the room, a warmth, a sense of being watched over by something loving. Yeah, he whispered. I feel her. Emily hugged him tight. You should share what you wrote. People need to hear it. How do you know what I wrote? Emily pulled back and looked at him with those gray eyes that saw too much. Because I know you, Dad. And I know you're scared, but you don't have to be. The people who need to hear it will find it, and it will help them, just like it helped you. Sam looked at his 9-year-old daughter and realized she was wiser than he'd ever be. Okay, he said, I'll share it. That afternoon, after Emily went to a friend's house, Sam created an anonymous account on one of the forums he'd been reading, and he posted his story. He expected nothing, maybe a few views, maybe some skeptical comments, missiles. But within an hour, he had 50 responses. Within a day, 500. Missions. People sharing their own experiences. People saying they'd been contacted too. People saying they'd been praying for exactly this kind of confirmation. Missionary. Saying his story had changed something in them, had helped them remember, had given them permission to believe in their own experiences. Sam read through the responses, overwhelmed. He wasn't alone. None of them were alone. This was happening all over the world. Thousands of people waking up. Dismant of people are being contacted. Mistakenly of people remember that consciousness is eternal, that death is transition, that prayer works through frequency. The shift was real. The awakening was happening, and he was part of it. Not because he was special, but because he'd been willing to question, shimmer to pray to something beyond the God he'd been taught, willing to receive an answer that shattered everything he thought he knew. And now, by sharing his story, he was helping others do the same. Proliferation at a time. One awakening at a time. One remembering at a time. Until the critical mass was reached. Happened next will show you exactly what it looks like when awakening goes viral. 6 months after Sam posted his story, everything changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually, like water wearing away stone, like seasons shifting, like consciousness expanding 1 degree at a time. The forum post had been shared across platforms. Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. People had copied it, added to it, created videos reading it aloud, made artwork inspired by it. Sam's anonymous account had received thousands of messages, people sharing their own contact experiences, people asking for guidance, people saying his story had given them permission to speak their own truth. He'd started responding to messages, carefully, thoughtfully, never claiming to have all the answers but sharing what he'd learned. And something unexpected had happened. A community had formed. Not a cult, not a religion, not an organization. Just a loose network of people who'd had similar experiences, who were asking similar questions, who were supporting each other through the disorienting process of awakening. They called themselves the Frequency Collective. Not because anyone had officially named it, but because the term had emerged organically from their conversations about consciousness and vibration and the field that connected everything. Sam had resisted becoming any kind of leader. He was still just an insurance adjuster in Colorado, still just a father raising a daughter who saw things other people didn't see. But people kept reaching out, kept asking if he'd speak at gatherings, kept inviting him to podcasts and interviews. And eventually, he'd said yes. Not because he wanted attention, bracelets, but because the being had been right. Crimson who needed to hear this were finding him, and he had a responsibility to share what he'd learned. The first gathering was in Boulder, organized by a woman named Claire, who'd had her own contact experience and wanted to create space for others to share theirs. 50 people showed up. They met in a community center, sitting in a circle, and for 3 hours they shared stories. A man who'd been visited after praying for healing from cancer. A woman who'd seen a craft while hiking and received a telepathic message about humanity's potential. A teenager who's been keeping my experience secret for 40 years. I thought I was crazy. Thank you for making me feel less alone. That's when Sam understood. This wasn't about him. This was about creating space for people to remember, to share, to support each other through the awakening process. The gatherings multiplied. Denver, Fort Collins, Colorado Springs. Then other states. California, Oregon, New Mexico, Arizona. Sam traveled when he could, bringing Emily with him when school allowed. And everywhere they went, the same thing happened. People shared their experiences. People cried. People laughed. People remembered. And the frequency shifted. You could feel it in the rooms, a palpable sense of something changing, something opening, something that had been dormant for so long finally waking up. Imprisonment had started speaking at the gatherings, too. Age-long presentations, just brief shares about what it was like to grow up knowing her mother was still present, still connected, just in a different form. People were mesmerized by her. A 9-year-old speaking with the wisdom of someone who'd never forgotten what most adults had lost. Death isn't the end, she'd say simply. It's just changing form, like water becoming steam. It's still water, just different. My mom is still my mom, just different. And she's always with me. Finamplicity of it, the clarity, the complete absence of doubt. It affected people deeply. Imprisonment, a man approached Sam with tears streaming down his face. My son died 2 years ago. He was 7. And I've been drowning in grief. Convinced I'd never see him again, never feel him again. But listening to your daughter, I realized I have been feeling him. I've been dismissing it as wishful thinking, but it's real, isn't it? He's still here. Yes, Sam had said. He's still here. The man had collapsed into Sam's arms, sobbing, and Sam had held him, feeling the weight of grief beginning to transform into something else. Missions, at the absence of pain, but the presence of connection. The understanding that love doesn't end, that consciousness transcends form, that separation is an illusion. Imposition happening every cabin, standing on the deck, looking up at the stars. Emily was asleep upstairs. The mountains were silent except for the wind moving through the aspens, and Sam felt it, the presence, stronger than ever before. Not just the being who'd visited him, but something larger. Imientos, the field itself, the consciousness that connected everything. And within that field, he felt Sarah, not as a separate entity, imized, a frequency, a vibration, a love that had never ended. I'm so proud of you, he felt her communicate, not in words, but in pure knowing. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Tears streamed down Sam's face. I miss you, he whispered. I miss your physical presence. I miss holding you. I miss hearing your voice. I know, and that's okay. Missing me means you loved me. But I'm not gone, Sam. I'm right here. I've always been right here. And I always will be. Sam felt something release in his chest. The last remnant of resistance. The last piece of grief that had been holding him in the past. He didn't have to let go of Sarah. He just had to let go of the belief that she was gone. She wasn't gone. She was transformed. And he could feel her anytime he chose to tune into that frequency. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for everything. Thank you for Emily. Thank you for the years we had. Thank you for still being here. Thank you for remembering, he felt her respond. Thank you for waking up. Thank you for helping others wake up. This is what we came here to do, Sam, both of us. You're doing it, and I'm so proud. Withdrawing faded gently, and Sam stood there feeling more at peace than he'd felt since before the accident. He wasn't healed. Grief didn't work that way, but he was transformed. He understood now that love doesn't end, that consciousness is eternal, that death is transition, not termination. And that understanding changed everything. The next morning, Sam received an email from a producer at a major podcast, one with millions of listeners. They'd heard about his story and wanted him to come on the show. Sam stared at the email for a long time. Story with millions of people. The host, a thoughtful man in his 40s who'd built his career on long-form conversations about consciousness and culture, leaned forward. So, Sam, tell me about the night you prayed for contact. And Sam told him. Everything. The grief. The loss of faith. The desperate prayers to something beyond the God he'd been taught. The being that appeared. The message about consciousness and frequency and humanity's awakening. The transformation that followed. He spoke for 2 hours, and the host barely interrupted, just let him tell the story. Immigration, the host removed his headphones and looked at Sam with something like awe. That's the most profound thing I've heard in 10 years of doing this show. You believe me? Sam asked. I don't know if it matters whether I believe you. What matters is that you believe you. And that your experience has clearly transformed you. People will feel that, and some of them will wake up because of it. The episode was released 2 weeks later. Within 24 hours, it had been downloaded 3 million times. Missions. Within a week, 10 million. The comment section was flooded. Thousands of people sharing their own experiences. Thousands more saying they'd never believed in any of this, but something about Sam's story rang true. Thousands more saying they'd been waiting their whole lives to hear someone articulate what they'd always felt but couldn't express. The frequency was shifting. The awakening was accelerating. And Sam Hega, insurance adjuster, widower, father, was at the center of it. Not because he was special, but because he'd been willing. Willing to pray to something beyond his understanding. Willing to receive an answer that shattered his worldview. Willing to share his truth even when it made him vulnerable. And now, millions of people were waking up because of it. The being had been right. It was exponential. Missions waking up and affecting 10. Those 10 affected 100. Those 100 affected 1,000, until was reached, until the timeline shifted, until humanity chose awakening over destruction. Sam didn't know if they'd make it, didn't know if enough people would wake up in time, but he knew willing to receive it.